So I think you did a really great job of summing it up. Aha Media Group is focused in the healthcare space. Our mission is to empower people to make the most important decisions of their lives. And in a non-socialized healthcare system, people have a lot of choice, and that tends to make it confusing. The famous paradox of choice: when there are too many choices, it's hard to know what to do. And only 37% of Americans have a college degree or higher. So you're dealing with a population of people who are having trouble a lot of the time understanding the complex nature of healthcare and all the different choices that they have. To further that, I think that when you look at what happened in the world with COVID, through the lens of COVID, you can see the Center for Disease Control in the United States says that a pandemic is just as much a communications crisis as it is a healthcare emergency. And when looking at it through that lens, we saw how incredibly important it was to use patient-centric and customer-centric language around healthcare and around patients, around diseases and conditions. A lot of people didn't really understand the difference between a virus and a bacteria. And when you look at it from that perspective and you think about how little people really do know, and not in a judgmental way, but just why would you have to know the difference between those two things if you've never been sick, or, if you've brought your child to the doctor and they've always given you an antibiotic? So what we really try to do is help the organizations that we serve, both in the B2C, business to customer, as well as B2B, business to business, as well as another category that we call B2P, business to physician or doctor, communicate with them in a way that really helps them understand what they need to do with this healthcare information, what the next steps are, and using SEO and that kind of writing that will appeal to the search engines to help people find that information. Yeah, so I think there's two distinct parts of content strategy. The first is helping users accomplish their tasks, and the second is satisfying the business objectives of the organization. And there are three ways to get at that. There's editorial brand, which is the first part, the actual writing, style guides, personas, messaging architecture. Then the second part is really workflow and governance. How does content get produced in a cycle that makes sense to the organization, where everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing at every point in time? And then there's a separate part of content strategy, which I think is really its own thing now, called content engineering. And that's really the back end of content, metadata, data, structured content, adaptive content, that kind of thing. So it's a very exciting time, I think, for content, but it's also still a really confusing time. And I just wrote an article defining content strategy, and content marketing, and I called it slippery fish, because I do think so many people think of these kinds of categories in different ways, and it's really hard to get us to a place where we're using the same vocabulary and meaning the same thing. I think content marketing is a tactic within marketing, and the idea is to use stories and information and intellectual property from a brand to convince customers to develop a relationship with that brand, and then to patronize that brand when they're ready to do so. That's a tactic within marketing. It's a different way to build a relationship with an audience, just like direct mail might be a way, or advertising might be a way. So content strategy is used to produce the content that's a part of the content marketing strategy. So to me, a content marketing strategy is, how are you actually going to tactically implement content marketing? How are you going to do that? You're going to use some of the elements of content strategy to get there. And that's how I see the two intersecting.
Okay.
Sure. So I think the first thing you have to do is establish SMART goals. Is it realistic? Is it, I always get measurable? Is it, relevant? What's the timeline? Is it strategic? So that's the first thing you have to do, is really sort of understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then you really have to pay very careful attention to your audience and what they're looking for. And we've never had more data about our audiences, because we can really track almost everything that they do online, although that is going to change soon. But So I think that that's the first step that has to be taken. I think a really important tool is personas. I think that however deep you want to get with them, however shallow you want to make them, there needs to be enough information in them to give content creators and marketers in general a really good picture and shape to who they're talking to. I think you need to figure out how you want to represent yourself as a brand in the marketplace. And I think that you need to have messages that support those ideas. And then you need to decide your voice and tone. What do you want to sound like? Where do you want to sound one way when you're giving people error messages versus how you want to sound when you're talking about, cancer? And then the last thing is where and when do you publish this content, so you're reaching the right people at the right time in the right place. Yeah, so I think you have to remember there are billions of web pages and a lot of content out there. People usually need to have 9 touch points before they even think about it. Inside of healthcare, people are searching for information. I think 30% of all searches on Google daily have to do with healthcare. So if you think about that, you can really see how much it really does take over what people are doing. Is it 30% or 15%? Whatever it is, it's really overwhelming the amount of healthcare information that people are searching for. And so in the same way that you research your audiences and you understand who they are, what motivates them, what they care about, what their questions are, I think their questions are really the critical part. You need to know the vocabulary that they use. Most people have coping strategies. When you watch them search, and again, people search very differently for different things. So when somebody's doing a healthcare search, they're educating themselves as they're going along in their search. Where if somebody's looking for a pair of jeans, they might be educating themselves on like different sizes and different styles, but it's a very different kind of search. It's probably more fun, although any woman who's ever looked for a pair of jeans can tell you it's a pretty frustrating experience. But it's not the same as having a healthcare challenge. So, and then when somebody's doing a B2B search because their CFO asked them to find a better software, it's a completely different kind of search. So, they might be going to landing pages and, entering in their information to get content that's going to help them make this decision, and then they become a lead, and so it's going into a completely different buying cycle. So the bottom line is that SEO is really important. It's critical for establishing a vocabulary of how people are going to find your content. The problem comes about when you get into these keyword stuffing. So we just had a blog that we wrote for a healthcare organization, and their SEO firm came in and added 13 phrases in the blog that were the same phrases. And we went back to them and they're like, no, Google's gonna just X this out. Like, this is ridiculous. First of all, a spider bot is gonna know that this is keyword stuffing. And not only that, but a human being reading this blog is not going to like it because they're gonna see that you're repeating the same phrases. It doesn't make sense anymore. So we really have to do a very good job of understanding that SEO leads the person to the content, and then we need the content to sing on its own to the person. And that's where I think we get stuck. So, synonyms and long tail keywords are all really important. Metadata is critical. What you're putting in your page titles and your browser titles and your H2s and your meta description, and all that stuff. And we could argue about, how valuable they are, how much it changes. But I have to say, I've been doing this for about 17 years and the best practices have not changed. Google will tell you the same thing over and over, and they're 94% market share. So you can pretty much guarantee that people who are searching are using a Google product. And so if that is what's going on for people, then we need to use Google's tools. People also ask, their keyword finders, Google Trends, all of those tools are really valuable to getting at the vocabulary that your audience is using. Yeah, I think again, Google is looking for the signal in the noise, right? So what they're looking for is, are you an expert on this? Do you write about this in a regular way? Is this something you update constantly? Do you have trust and authority in this particular piece of content? So if you're writing a lot of pages that support, and again, I'm speaking here from a healthcare perspective because I'm not a product goods expert, But if you're a hospital that has a really sophisticated cancer institute, you better have hundreds of pages on cancer and how cancer is treated and how people can find, the technologies that they need to get better and what clinical trials look like. And that hub and spoke approach really does make a lot of sense, and it really is going to help your SEO. So yes, Google's been talking about that for years, the hub and spoke approach. I think it's just, again, one more signal that tells them this is a place where we should send people because this is highly relevant content. What I'll also tell you is that that's a really, I think, a pertinent way to think about this is, are we doing an integrated SEO strategy? So are we thinking about hub and spoke? Are we thinking about research in a certain way? Are we thinking about building pages with strong metadata? It's not just one thing or the other thing. It has to be a holistic approach to creating valuable content. Yeah, so we create personas for our clients and we train them on how to use them, some better than others. It depends on the content maturity of an organization, and that's a really important thing to think about. I think that the healthcare blogs, consumer blogs that are doing well, basically have one persona. They're either going after a millennial or they're going after a Gen Xer, and they're very clear on who that woman is because they think that, women are really influencing the healthcare decisions in the home. So, that's one way to go about it. I think a different way to go about it is to think about not necessarily all the millions of people that are looking for healthcare information, but what do they have in common with each other? So somebody who's just diagnosed with a blood disorder could be a 78-year-old grandmother. It could be a 16-year-old skateboarder. We really don't know. There are certain diseases and conditions that just can hit a wide range of people. So what we always tell our clients is that you have to answer people's questions where they are. So it doesn't really matter if you're a 78-year-old grandmother or you're a 16-year-old skateboarder. You probably have nothing in common with each other, except that now you have this blood disorder. So now you are part of a community where you have to educate yourself and understand what your treatment options are. And so what we really look at is questions and answers. What is this? How do I treat it? When am I going to get better? What happens if this treatment doesn't work? Are there research protocols I could be a part of? Is this something that is going to kill me, or is it just something I'm going to have to live with? Are there other people who have been through this that I can talk to? Is there an association that, researches and gives money to this blood disorder? So I think that that's really where, if you're being strategic about healthcare content, you're thinking about why are these people gathering on this piece of content? What's valuable to them about it? And the intersection is that topic, not necessarily who they are. That's really where I think in healthcare, it's a little bit easier in some ways than it might be in other kinds of industries. Right. So we used to build a tool called archetypes, which we would do like chronically ill, newly emergent, surgical candidate. But writers and content creators have a really hard time with just a broad, chronically ill. That could be 1,000 things. That could be diabetes. That could be a blood disorder. Completely different, right? So what we do now is we create a persona, and then we talk in that persona about how they fit into different buckets. And that, I think, has been helpful in terms of writing and content creation, again, videos, even taking pictures, thinking about what does a chronically ill patient encounter in their journey that might be different than a surgical patient, right? So, and to remember that a chronically ill patient can become a surgical patient at some point also. So just, that's where it gets fun and exciting and really difficult in healthcare about thinking about audiences. Right. And so we use something called a bite, a snack, and a meal. There's an adult learning theory called progressive disclosure. And what it means is that people can only learn in small chunks. Mm-hmm. So we write a short, introduction in a bite, and then we give people more information in a snack, and then we give them a lot of information in a meal. And it gives people choice. So if they get to a page that's overwhelming, they might be able to find a quick introduction at the top or a short video they can watch or something like that. So hopefully that's useful to your audience in thinking about how to take complex topics and break them up so that people don't get overwhelmed by the info. So I don't believe in the full audit unless you're redesigning a website. And that actually is really questionable about whether or not you need to touch every page anyway. So I am actually a person who, when I talk to clients, I'll say to them, what are you hoping to get out of the audit? Like, what is the end goal of the audit? And then crafting the audit to satisfy that end goal. Touching every piece of content, I think, usually leads to a problem where we no longer have clarity on what to keep, what to throw away, because it's almost impossible to know importance. I'll give you an example that I've talked about a million times. This happened 10 years ago. We were looking at a page on a huge academic medical center site that had 8 page visits in 1 year. And it was a very rare type of eye surgery. And they wanted to get rid of the page because what they were trying to do was get rid of the bottom 20% of their traffic. They were just gonna delete it all, you know?
Okay.
But when we talked to the eye surgeon, each one of those surgeries brought in $300,000 for the organization.
Wow.
So you do that math,
Oh.
now you're in a different place, right? That's over $1 million. I mean, that's a lot of money, right? That's $2.4 million, right? For 8 visits. If those patients became patients, right? We don't know if those 8 visits equaled. And when we talked to him, we also found out that like most of his work came from referrals. So we didn't really know, were people looking at the page or whatever. But anyway, the page ended up staying up there, right? We just rewrote it to make it easier to understand. And probably by rewriting it, it elevated itself in the traffic because now it was easier to find and it was easier to read and it followed metadata. It had no, tagging in it or whatever. So I think that that's where touching every piece of content can get very complicated, because if you start doing that with, 10,000 pages of content, it'll take you 10 years. So what we really try to do is do strategic audits. What are patterns that we can see? What are your stakeholders feeling challenged about? What are patterns that we're seeing in your content? What are patterns that we're seeing in your content production? What's happening on your channels? What kind of engagement are you seeing? I'm not a really big believer if you have a 50-page site or a 100-page site or maybe even 150 pages, but once you start getting bigger than that, and I'm not saying that there is an advantage in having all your URLs crawled and dumping it into a spreadsheet for Screaming Frog, but I really think unless you're redesigning a site and trying to go for a rebrand and looking for something completely different, I'm not sure that touching every page makes sense. Now, touching every page of a section, let's say you have a section of your website that needs an overhaul, that might be a worthwhile kind of audit to look at. But I think that when you do that kind of audit, it has to be balanced with what are the stakeholder needs? Why do you want to rewrite that section on your website? What are you really looking to accomplish? That has to be balanced with all those pages that you're looking at and you're touching. So I really am not a big believer in that kind of audit. I think I've said that now 7 times. So it's very clear to your audience that Ahava Leibtag does not believe in touching every piece of content. Right. So I understand that kind of audit. I think that's, you're building sort of an inventory of what you've got and how you can repurpose.
Exactly. More inventory.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I mean, if you're coming in as a consultant and your client says to you, we don't have any content, one of the first things you want to do is show them that they're probably sitting on a mountain of content.
Exactly.
Content is in containers that doesn't allow it to be freed and used in other ways. So yeah, I agree with that 100%. But to me, that's different than sort of just going through all the URLs and figuring out what's there. And
Sure.
yeah, so I always think that you're going to do best with written content, see how it performs, and then move it into a different content type, like an infographic or a video or something like that. You're just going to get indexed faster. You're going to be able to change things faster. But again, it really depends on what you're selling. So if you're selling coffee tables, then photographs are your most important content type, because that's what people want to see. And dimensions are your most important content type.
So what do you call content type? Content type is really the packaging of the content?
No, so I have what I call a mental model for content, where it's a piece of information you're trying to convey. Mm-hmm. What does your audience need? What sort of wrapper do you put it in? Is it written? Is it audio? Is it text? And then how do you distribute it? So like your blog is not your content, it's a delivery tool for your content. And yeah, so that's how I think of it. Like, I think distribution and format get very messy. People will say, oh, it's a Facebook post. Well, that's not really a content type. It's written and it's on Facebook, but Facebook is a channel for distribution. You know what I mean? So you could easily take that Facebook post and turn it into an Instagram post, which now Facebook does for you automatically. So I think that that's where, people get sort of, it gets squidgy. I don't know if that's how you translate that word in French.
I know. That'd be hard.
And it's challenging for people. I think that this is a term we do get hung up on. I do think it's an important term, but I think it's only important when you're conversing with people who are creating content. I don't know that it's as important as understanding the difference between content strategy and content marketing.
Okay.
You could just say format type, and then you just define what that means with the person that you're creating content with. And then I think it just, that's the vocabulary word you decided to use. Is if it's strategic. So if you go to the CEO and you say, one of the things you put in the business plan is that we have to do X, can you talk about the steps that you're taking to do that? And then you use that as a written blog post and as a video series and as a, infographic or whatever that's going to impress upon your clients or your internal employees what's important, then yeah, that's great. If you say to the CEO, can you just talk? Then no, it's not valuable. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in combing through an organization. If you're gonna be a content marketer in an organization or a marketer in general, you have a beat, and that beat is that brand. And so you need to reach out to the customer service call center and say, hey, what are you hearing lately? That's an investigative journalist has that approach, right? It's curiosity about everything that goes on. And it's your job to create conduits, channels that people bubble up stories to you. So, we have a daily huddle every day at Ahava Media Group, and everybody talks about what's going on with their different projects. And every once in a while, somebody says something that a client said that gives us an idea either on our process or on our marketing, or to write a blog post to make it more clear in the industry what that means and what's that about. I just had something happen with a client and I posted something on LinkedIn because I was like, we need to think about this whole approach differently. And it was a theme that's come up a lot. So I knew that I wanted to address it in a public forum like LinkedIn. So yeah, I think that we definitely have ways to create different types of formats from one piece of content. But I think what's more important is remembering that great stories about the brand can come from anywhere. I mean, listen, we've written healthcare blogs about janitors, custodial, people in a hospital. They have great stories. I mean, think about all the things they see and hear. You know what I'm saying? Like, they got the tea. So that's where you really can shine if you're thinking about the unusual places that stories can come from. The CEO is not that interesting, quite frankly. So all writing is communicating ideas in an organized fashion so that people can understand them. So if you talk, then chances are you can write. You just need somebody to help you figure out how to take a lot of your ideas and organize them in a way that another person can understand. But I really, when people say to me, I'm not a good writer, I'm not a good writer either, but man, I'm a great talker. So, that's what I say to people, like, that's ridiculous. If you communicate, you can write. If you can string a sentence together, then you can write. You just need to figure out how to organize your thoughts so that they make sense to somebody reading them. And that's where when I hear people say I'm not a good writer, I'm just like, I'm not buying that one, because you're talking to me right now. So you're perfectly capable of writing.
That's a great positive answer. Lots of coaching also. I love that. Okay.
No, I'm a big believer in that.
Few actually we went through part of the questions, but a few more just to
wait. I want to add one thing to that if I can. I love it when people tell me they're not creative. I'm like, did you solve a problem today? Then you're creative. It's a kind of way to recognize. One of my friends posted on LinkedIn today that part of their mission is to make people smile every day. And his son looked at the logo and said to him, then why do you have a frown in your logo? Because it was this kind of swoopy thing. And he said, I have no visual talent. I didn't see that. But my response to him was, but you had somebody else look at it and give you their perspective. That's creativity. That's what that is. It's trying to bring in another perspective because you know you yourself can't see it. And so anytime anyone says to me, I can't write, I'm not creative, I don't buy it. Human beings by their design are creative. That's all we do all day is solve problems all day long. Yeah. So in March of 2020, when the pandemic started and I started seeing people writing about COVID, and we had written about it already because it was a big concern starting in December and January, people were starting to say there's this virus coming out of China. Is it dangerous? And, the feeling was like the flu was far more dangerous at that point. So we had already sort of written about it and used it in some workshop examples. And then when they shut down and I saw people writing about it, I was like, oh boy, the healthcare communications world is in trouble. So we created a plain language cheat sheet, which we actually won a lot of awards for. It was a very well-respected piece of content marketing. And it was used by, hopefully hundreds of people who were writing about COVID. And the first week we released it, we only had like 120 downloads. And I was so frustrated because I really felt like this is a critical piece that's going to change, how people think about writing about this stuff. So I said to them, we're ungating it. I said to my marketing team, and I was like, this is not a lead generation piece. This is a value piece. We care about our community. We're in a huge global emergency. This isn't the time to count how many leads we get. That's not what we're trying to do here. And I don't know, there were thousands of page views after that. What also happened, so then I said we're ungating all of it because all of it was helpful. Like we have pieces about, SEO, and we have pieces about writing about difficult topics. And, all of our stuff is really geared towards the healthcare communication field. So I said, we're ungating all of it. Just ungate it. It's valuable content. We're not gating it right now. People need it. And our social media subscriptions went up. I always get them confused, but one went up 45% and our email subscriptions went up 55%. And that's because we were producing valuable things into the marketplace. People needed this content. They needed it now. It was helpful to them. They wanted it. And they didn't want to give their email. Like it was just another step that they had to complete. Now they're going to bother me. I'm going to, you know what I mean? So I say this with a big caveat. I mean, Andrew Davis made a big deal of it. Andy made a big deal out of it from Orbit. Ann Handley wrote about it. But one of the things that I really tried to impress upon them and that hopefully their audiences is that I'm the CEO of a small marketing company. I can make that decision. If you're the CMO, the chief marketing officer of a multi-billion-dollar company, it's a different thing because when you walk into your CFO, you need to use metrics that show that your marketing department is pushing the needle on revenue.
Yeah, but you still had some.
Oh, our sales jumped. I mean, we gained sales by 20% that year, but that might not be because of the content ungating. That could just be because people needed somebody to write all this content. There's no way to know. That's the thing. All these metrics are vanity metrics. When it comes down to it, the only way you can truly figure out, so we, let's see if I can do the math really fast now. I would say 15% of our revenue can be counted back to an inbound lead. Mm-hmm. But we have no idea because we can't really track anymore how many touch points there were before that person chose to reach out. And that's okay with me, but that might not be okay with a CMO. So that's the thing that I really want to impress upon people. And our marketing is getting more and more sophisticated. And there is this like, should we start gating stuff? The only thing that I could see us really gating, because we're going to spend a lot of money on it, is custom research. That would be something I could see gating, where we do research and show something in the healthcare communications field. We would want to gate that as a lead. But I don't know. I don't really feel that strongly about it. I really do feel like I'm trying to impact the way that people write and communicate about healthcare. I have this joke that, we're trying to make the healthcare web safer one word at a time. So I don't know, like it's a lead, whatever, either they'll become our customer or they won't. I'm not going to sweat it that much.
Because also maybe you write content for B2C. And at some point, the value of being generous and not trying to track everything might have been more profitable than like try to gate everything. And
But that's not true. We write content for B2B also. And our B2B customers use our content. So I don't think that is what it's about. I think for me, if we're producing a piece of content, I want people to use it to make their content better, whether they patronize us or not, because I truly believe in our mission. And that's a value, right? That's where it comes back to the values of the organization. Sometimes the real value of the organization is to make money. And that's okay. That's what companies exist to do. They exist to make money. But that's not my value is also to make money. I'm not in business not to make money, but my value is also around people who are terrified, who need help, and the people who actually create the content that can help them. Can we get better? And again, that's a very unusual situation to be in. And I think that what I would tell any customer, any client asking me is try it with one piece, pilot a piece of content and ungate it and see what happens. Your sales teams might kill you. They might say we can't exist on that because then we're not going to have real leads that we can follow up on. So every organization has to make that determination for themselves.
It can depend also on the type of content of the
everything.
No, it can depend on many things. It's just that if it's the bottom of the funnel content or very, very highly
100%.
You know, so
100%. But what I like to remind people is that nobody gates their blog, and there's tons of powerful stuff on their blog. So, and in asking people to subscribe to your email is a form of gating, right? That's what it is. So to me, it's sort of this conversation that tends to go in a circle, and it's better for every organization to decide for themselves where they're going to put their stake in the sand.
Thank you so much. I will get, if it's possible, if you can at some point send me the type of content it was about that you ungated it.
We ungated all of our content. You just go to our resources page. You can see it's all ungated. I mean, I think I spend my day trying to remind people to think about their audience. I find that that's my overwhelming conversation. Exactly. And then the other conversation that I try to have with people is don't try to mimic what somebody else is doing in their content marketing. If you're copying people, then you're not thinking about your business and what's really going to work for your business. Nobody has the same business as anybody else. They just don't. Businesses are made up of people and process and technology, and every business is different in those areas. And each one of those things is spinning constantly. So it's the middle is the disc and the identity of the company. And so there's just no way. So you have to figure out what's right for your business and your strategy and what you're trying to accomplish. And yeah, so I basically spend my day solving problems, reminding people to focus on their audience, and telling people not to copy anybody else.
Not to copy in your industry. I get that. And I understand, because there's so many different cases. When you're working in the SaaS technology, not to copy should be a big deal, because at some point it's extremely difficult to say, yeah, my audience is really different from
No, your audience isn't different, but how you impact your customers is different. You know, Asana did a great job in this. They're a project management software, and they in 2020 focused on their customers and how their customers used Asana to do the different things that they did. So this is where they got the idea from. This is exactly what you were talking about. A customer said to them, Asana is helping us save whales and dolphins. It was some sort of, environmental protection company, not for profit. And the marketer heard that, and they were like, let's go interview all our customers and find out what Asana is helping them do.
That's amazing.
That's a very different way of getting at, what makes your company different. It's not the software, it's what the software helps people do. So any business, anybody who says to me, oh, our industry is all the same, I'm like, no, it's not. I've seen plumbing companies do amazing things. There's this one company that applies protective coating to glass when it's on skyscrapers, and they do this amazing job of showing this video. It's great content marketing. I've seen great content marketing out of shipping companies. If people say it's all the same, then they're just not doing their jobs. They're not thinking from different angles about how this product really affects people's lives. And I really do think that there's a million ways to go at it, and you just have to be willing to have a very open mind about it. Yeah, no, so the number one thing that we look for is curiosity in both roles. So when I interview a writer, they've already gone through, like 7 different recruiting steps, but they come to me last because I look for cultural fit. And the third question in, I'll ask them, or not the third question, but like halfway through the interview, I'll say to them, what are you reading right now? And I love it when they're like, well, I'm in the middle of 3 books. And then like, they're like ashamed to tell me one of them because it's like a guilty pleasure. Like I'm reading a sci-fi novel. Meanwhile, like I love sci-fi. So like, I love it when people tell me that they're doing that because I'm like, tell me the title, I'll write it down. But I love, that's a sign that people are curious. People will say to me sometimes like, I'm reading this book, but I love listening to this podcast, and that just shows that they're engaged with the world. They want to learn more. I look for good writing, but honestly, like you're a good writer. Writing is a practice. And so by the time you come to us and work for us, you have a really established book of great healthcare journalism and great healthcare writing. We actually did just take a chance on somebody who got a master's degree in clinical research and started to become a clinical researcher. And she's like, I don't like this. I really want to be a writer. Mm-hmm. And we took a chance on her and she's amazing and doing a fabulous job. So, you never know where they're going to come from. We have another woman who's a pharmacist who is a good writer. But in any case, I do not think that you need to be a good writer to be a content strategist, but it's rare for me to find one that is involved in editorial and brand. And content engineering, you need to be able to write from a memo perspective, from an email perspective, from a report perspective. But if you're a content strategist that's looking at content from a qualitative point of view, you probably need to be a writer or a videographer or a photographer, whatever it is, however you are getting at the content itself. I would research my audience. I would try to get as much data as I could about my audience.
And that would dictate everything.
You will never fail the more you know about your audience. The more you care about them, the more you want to spend a lot of time getting to know them. I always tell this story. About 17 years ago, I used to sit in hospital waiting rooms and talk to patients about what they were looking for out of content. And that's what started my business, because I took the extra time to sit there in I'll give an example. I was sitting in the radiation waiting room and people get hangry because there's only a vending machine there and it's very far from the cafeteria. So I wrote a webpage that was like, things you need to know for your first appointment. And everybody I talked to after was like, I love that page, made a difference. People come with snacks now. They're ready for how long the appointment's going to take, because the first appointment is a lot of setting up so that they can pinpoint the tumor. It seems like such a stupid thing, but think about the difference that makes in everyone's day when a patient is not hungry. It's just a completely different experience. And so if you have $15,000, go spend it finding out who your audience is and what they care about. Because while it may not affect your revenue, it's going to affect the ability for your employees to do their job better, and that will affect your profit. And that's an important thing to remember also.